I use abaca paper pulp to make my jewelry and art, which I make myself in a paper beater. It's hard to visualize how a beater makes paper pulp without some visuals, so I'm going to make some pulp and take you through my process. This is the fiber that I use to make my jewelry and paper. It's called abaca, and this is the inner bark of the abaca tree. When I get it in this form, it's called half stuff. I have to soak it overnight to hydrate all the fibers and soften it up. And this is my beater. This is what I use to make paper pulp. When I take off the cover here, you can see the roller underneath. And when I lift up the whole mechanism, you can see the bed plate underneath. Both the roller and the bed plate have blunt edges, nothing is sharp. The way this works is the roller and the bed plate beat the fiber or pound the fiber to break it apart rather than cut it. That leaves the fibers with a tapered end rather than a cut end, so those fibers are going to twine themselves around each other at the ends and shrink really hard onto my jewelry.
You're getting wet?
Yeah. I know. Hazards of paper making.
Getting your husband wet?
Yeah. Oh, you mean I'm getting you wet?
That's what I said. You're getting me wet?
Oh, sorry. I start by making sure that the whole thing is very clean. I want to make sure my paper pulp stays clean as I work. My abaca fiber has been soaking overnight and it's all ready to go into the beater. So first I just add a little bit of water to get it started. And now I can start by just tearing the fiber into smaller pieces. If I were to put the whole sheet in, it would just clog up the beater. And this also just gives it a head start, because this is a very long process. I add a little more water as I go, because the water level has to be very precise. And sometimes I have to shim up one side of the table or the other to make sure that everything's perfectly level. You can really see that there's movement through the beater now. The fiber's passing through that roller. And I'm just adjusting the height of the roller. I start with it really high, and I'm slowly working it down to where it's almost touching that bed plate. I have to hang out with it for a long time and make sure that nothing's getting stuck inside the mechanism and shutting it down. And you can already see the fiber starting to break down a bit. Alright, you can hear my very loud batch of paper pulp going back there in my beater. This batch is going remarkably well. Usually getting it started is a bit of a slower process because it likes to clog up the beater and I have to open it up and get it moving again a few times before it's really rolling. But for some reason, I got some magic today and it's going really well. We want the roller and the bed plate to come as close together as possible so the fiber's passing through a small space and getting sort of hammered really efficiently. And you slowly lower that over the course of maybe an hour, but I got it down in like 20 minutes, all the way down. It's pretty good. Don't know why. Alright, it's been 15-20 minutes. Let's see how we're doing. Still moving a little slowly for my taste. Still very chunky. It's a paper maker's trick. Get fiber off your hands. Just tap the surface of the water. Here we are at about 2 hours of beating, and you can see that the fiber has broken down a lot more. And this is about the 4-hour mark. Okay, here we are at 8 hours of beating. Feels about right. At the very end of the process, when I think I'm done, I like to do the jar test. And what I do is put a little bit of fiber in a jar of water and then give it a good shake so all the fibers are suspended in the water and kind of swirling around. And then I hold it up into the light and look at the length of the fibers, and I can really see if they look the way I need them to look. To be honest, a lot of this process is just by feel and from experience. I can tell by looking and by feeling the pulp if it's going to do what I want it to do, if it's going to look the way that I want it to look. And then I test the jewelry component to see how the fiber is casting onto the metal. I'm looking for a very particular look and feel in the way that the fiber attaches itself to the metal, so I know that the pieces are going to look just the way I want them to look when they're finished. Before I empty the beater, I open it up and just make sure that I pull any clogs and clumps and things that have gathered in the machine and just run them through. So I make sure all of the pulp inside is beaten well. Okay, final step. Just raised the roller. I'm going to let it run through for a few minutes just to break up any clumps that may have formed. And it's time to empty into some clean buckets. This pulp will be perfect for jewelry making in about 2 weeks. I almost ferment it because I want it to be broken down even more and have sort of a softer feel. And then I take my time and I make sure I clean every nook and cranny and surface to make sure there's no pulp hiding anywhere inside the machine. All right, let's mix up a bucket and see how we did. The water to pulp ratio is something else I do by feel. So with this test dip of a jewelry component, I can see that there's too much pulp and not enough water. So let's add a little bit more water. And we'll dip a component again, and there's still not enough water, too much pulp. So let's add a bit more water and try one more time. That looks just about right. Just for a comparison, here's the old pulp, and here is the new pulp. So different. Perfect pulp. And I'm out of lids, so fancy lid. So the quick version of how I use this pulp to make jewelry, I start with making a metal component and then dip it into the pulp and swirl it around to gather up some of those fibers. Those will dry completely, and I'll dip it again and again and again as many times as I need to fill in all of those open spaces in the metal. Then I can dye the paper any color of the rainbow that I want using a pigment dye. Then I lock everything in with a sealer, sculpt it into whatever shape that I want, and then coat it in resin to make it waterproof. This whole process is slow and time-consuming and can be very tedious, but oh my goodness, I love it. It's almost miraculous to me that paper can do this.